Okay, go ahead and begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. My research is to build up a model to quantify the air pollutants from the vessels at ports in China. So what I mean vessel is include like the ferries, cruise, the chemical ships and container ships that you could commonly see in the Victoria Harbour or Kwai Tsing in Hong Kong. And what is the vessel emissions? In my research, it refers to the air pollutants coming from the vessel, which including the sulfur dioxide, loss, and particulate matters like PM2.5. So usually these air pollutants are generated when the engine of the vessels are burning the oils to create energy to support the vessel operations. So when the vessels keep moving, the engine will keep burning the oils to create energy, and the air pollutants will keep coming out from the vessels into the atmosphere. So, and in my research, I'm going to quantify the amount, that is how much air pollutants emitted from the vessels yearly. So based on their activities. So what that means. To further explain it, let me make a comparison. For example, how could we estimate how much carbon dioxide we produce every day? There are many options, and I think one of the options is you could estimate the yearly productions of carbon dioxide of your different modes of activities, like your running, walking, and sleeping. That is, for example, you know that you create 10 grams per minute. Every minute you create 10 grams of carbon dioxide. That when you are running, and then you know your running time per day, then you could multiply them together. Then you could know how much carbon dioxide you produce per day based on your running. And this is the same as when you're sleeping and walking. So then you add it up all together. Then you could know that how much carbon dioxide you produce per day. So this is the same as the vessel emissions. Because you know the ships, they could just stop at the harbor, and they could run fast and slowly, and they will produce different different amounts of carbon of air pollutants during different activity modes. So in my research, I will first estimate the yearly production of air pollutants from these vessels in different activity modes. And then I will also estimate their activities time. Then I will combine together to calculate the total amount of air pollutants emitted from the vessels. And based on these estimations results, I hope that it could serve as baseline or reference for the port regulation on air quality control. And my focus will based on the ports in China, probably the top 10 business ports in China. So I hope that would give the Chinese government a reference. Thank you.
Questions? So your aim is to create a baseline of the activity of how much of the amount of pollution for this group of ships. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And how would that be useful to have that baseline?
For example, currently many cities or countries will put out their goals for the carbon dioxide reduction or air pollutants reduction. Yeah, and this could be a reference for them to set their goals for the emission reductions. And also would be a reference like to how to regulate the ships at the ports or the vessels at ports. Because, for example, when you come into the ports, maybe you must slow down to at a slow speed, or you would create more air pollutants. And if all the ships at the ports are creates the high levels of air pollutants, so maybe the air around the ports will be terrible, and also affects the communities nearby.
What about fuel quality? I mean, is fuel quality a factor? That some fuels burn cleaner than others? Is that a factor that you need to consider?
Yes, these also are factors I would consider. Yeah, usually the fuel with less level of sulfur content, it will produce less sulfur dioxide. But because when you think about so it's also important for my research, that is I estimate the current emissions. So based on current situation, that how many current levels of the sulfur content. So then based on my results, then the government decides how much sulfur content should be reduced in your fuel.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about things like ship engine type or age? Is that a factor in terms of the production?
Yes,
production
sure.
time?
It will also include in my model, because when I talk about to estimate the unit productions of air pollutants from the ship, in fact, I would consider all these factors.
I was wondering how about in terms of I was just wondering about the recent thing with Volkswagen and their ability to figure out how to get around exactly this issue of emissions. Is this something that needs to be looked at in terms of ships as well?
You mean the characteristics of the ships?
Well, in Volkswagen, they managed to figure out a way that if their cars were being tested by emissions, they had a lower amount of pollutants coming out of the system, whereas it would register a lower amount than when it was actually the vehicle was actually running around. Then it had a higher pollution level. So they were able to actually change that. I was just wondering how that might that be a factor.
What you mean is?
I mean the fact that people know that they're being tested, so they tune their engines better. And then when they're not being tested, they change the way that they tune. Is there a monitoring system that maintains that they're always using the right thing?
It's a very interesting question, because you related to the benefits, the cost and benefits.
Well, what I mean is, right, it's a cost and benefit, because the ship owner decides, well, wait a minute, I'm being tested, so I'm going to make sure my engine's working right, but when they're not being tested, I don't worry about it.
The examiner can pretend to be the visitor on the ship.
Well, they have a way to, people can a lot of times people will give lip service, that they say, okay, I care about the environment when they're being tested, but when they're not being tested, they...
Because for Hong Kong, the ports have its own regulations on the ships,
Right.
and the same as the United States and Europe. But in China, they have not yet developed the policy on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.